is to adopt the agenda. Any additions or revisions?
No changes.
Hearing none, I'll move we approve the agenda as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We'll proceed accordingly. Next is approval of the minutes from the September 19th Planning Commission meeting. Anybody have any adjustments or additions? I'll move that we approve the minutes as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Moving on to new business. Tonight we have an item that was tabled from the September 17th meeting regarding the Creamery Building site plan and building materials and parking conditional use permit. Who am I going to turn this over to, Ben?
Yes, thank you. I will certainly try my best to recap at least not the entirety of the conversation, but some of the high points, so to speak. So the proposal tonight being an addition to the Creamery building as it is today. That addition consists of a single floor addition to the west, south, and east sides of that building. There's also under consideration tonight a conditional use permit application related to the use of the shared parking. As we talked about last time we met on September 19th, this property was included in part of the base analysis when the city undertook some of the public parking improvements back when those were originally contemplated, including things like the on-street parking on Tower Boulevard, Victoria Drive, Steiger Lake Lane, and call it the central parking lot, or commonly, since we have a owner here, the Victoria House parking lot. All of those improvements being made considering there was a base level of development, including the existing Creamery building, the conditional use permit looking for the use of additional shared parking beyond because of the addition and the additional parking demand generated by that new use. As the commission had discussed last time, there was some general concerns with what I had hopefully accurately summarized as 3 critical areas: the location and proximity of accessible parking to the entrance of the new building, location and function of the food deliveries, including garbage, to the site, and then also that location, function, and primarily the aesthetic of having kind of these back of house functions, particularly centered on that trash enclosure that was facing Victoria Drive. Since the last meeting, the applicant who's here tonight has spent quite a bit of time thinking and trying to evaluate what the best way to move forward is. And in the staff report tonight, I did summarize how and where some of those changes were made, but I'll outline or step through that process here with some of the slides coming up. I don't think anyone will have any questions on the current slide in terms of what property we're dealing with tonight, but outlined in red the existing conditions as they are. And then this is a revised aerial, including some of the changes here. And again, we'll go into more details, but that loading function that had been discussed previously today, as you'll see in some of the supplemental documents and images that we have, that will primarily serve as a trash-only location. The overall width that had previously been presented as 24 feet, that was an expanded driveway previously, will remain in similar configuration to what it is today, although the concrete on the private property side will end up being removed to support the trash trucks that come in because they are heavier than what had been using that route today. Also on this picture, and again, we'll get into more details, there was a lot of discussion about the 2 additional parking spaces that are being added on the alley, and question as to whether or not either one of them could be used as an accessible parking stall to serve the building. As you'll see in the documents that were provided in your packet, that was found to be infeasible primarily because of the slope of not only the street, but the parking spaces as well don't comply with ADA. But the applicant did evaluate some of the parking spaces along the north side of Tower Boulevard, and as you'll see illustrated later on, There are 2 accessible parking spaces proposed on the north side of Tower that, yes, would certainly accommodate close proximity to the front of this business, but would also serve kind of this central area of downtown as well. If you have questions, I can certainly come back. This is just a close-up of that revised site plan, and we'll go into a little bit more of the details, but just know if we need to come back to the overall site plan, we can do that. So this is a close-up that was included in that site plan packet of information. So the sidewalk that runs from east to west, as we had discussed last time, right near that, call it the southwest corner of the project, there's not as much grade change, and cutting the existing curb on that second space in from the west would allow for that ramp or that accessible aisle to access the public sidewalk that's back behind it. So that serves, I think, what the commission was initially concerned with in providing very proximate accessible parking to the front of this building. Few of the differences, and I had kind of slightly walked through it already. Previously, the proposal of enlarging that access drive to provide not only trash pickup but some food delivery had been shown as a 24-foot wide service access. The revised, after the applicant met with the garbage service that would be providing service to this building, the existing approach size was found to be adequate for their purposes, so it's 10 feet wide. You do see a flare here similar to the conditions that exist in place today, just based upon the proximity of where that enclosure or that door access to the building is located. So no physical changes here, and the applicant has worked to revise the aesthetic look of that enclosure as well, that we'll talk about in a minute. One of the other questions had to do with kind of this function of food delivery, and I included this image in your packet, but just identifying those different locations of where trucks are today. I know part of the discussion from the commission at the last meeting was whether or not a physical like loading dock style function could be incorporated into this site. Some of the drawbacks or hardships really has to do with the grade. As I had mentioned before, the alley is actually at a fairly significant or steep grade, and cutting into the project would not only remove some of the parking, but it might remove more parking than just providing that aisle due to the grade changes. So the applicant did meet with the food delivery service. They actually monitored the route that was taken that day, and did find that if they were able to utilize the same queuing location that's in the Rose Street parking lot that Noble Lion works, they could basically cart the food delivery across the street and into the building without having to park on Victoria Drive or Steiger Lake Lane. So that is the current proposal there, and you'll see the conditions that are provided in the resolution of recommendation have been modified to include having this off-street location. The parking, this is just the same slide that we reviewed last time, and I just, for the sake of having additional people here tonight and those that may not have caught the discussion last time, so the parking requirements for this type of space in downtown are basically 4 spaces short of what they were attributed when we talk about that base level of development that was calculated way back when all the parking downtown was established. Still looking at the applicant paying for those 4 spaces as provided for in our code is the request tonight. After I'm wrapped up, and if you have any questions, we'd look for the Planning Commission to hold that public hearing on the public parking. If you have any questions on this, I'd be happy to answer them before I move on.
And you guys probably covered all this last week, and I apologize for missing it. We've got 20,000 square feet roughly that's empty today because we don't have enough parking. What is our plan for parking moving forward?
Sure. So part of the analysis that was done is looking at the parking that's being added, not only with Victoria Flats finishing later this fall. We are working on an expansion or a completion, if you will, of the Rose Street parking lot. City Council is also looking at moving forward with reconstructing Steiger Lake Lane east of City Hall. That would include about 68 spaces that would be added there. Also contemplating what a permanent conversion of the one-way is to add more critical parking downtown in the core area of downtown. Somewhere in the tune of like 7 to 9 spaces is probably what we end up with on that permanent solution for parking. So there are quite a bit of additional parking that is being accommodated downtown.
With the analysis that everybody's done,
Mm-hmm.
when all these projects are done, do you think there'll be adequate parking to overcome the objection we keep hearing on the vacant building we have downtown?
When you say the vacant building, you're talking about the grocery store. Yes, so what you'll end up seeing, whether it's a grocery or some other type of retail use, is because of the composition of downtown, we kind of peak at different times for different buildings. So where today we actually have the biggest or the heaviest burden at our lunch hour, when restaurants are starting to get customers, we also have quite a bit of employment downtown, that adding these other parking opportunities through the different projects is creating kind of a balance to that. And with the restaurants themselves, looking at kind of their peak being more in the late evening, late afternoon, early evening, most of those businesses are then gone for the day. The employment businesses are gone for the day, so it is creating adequate capacity that way.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions here before I go on? So the subsequent slides are revised elevations, some of which have changed, some of which have not changed. This is the south elevation, so if you're standing at the Clock Tower building or where School of the Wise, Edward Jones is, and looking across the street, this is that elevation that you would see. Same, this east elevation is the same generally as what was previously seen there. This would be if you're standing on the alley, kind of right next to the Gannon building. This is the facade that you would see from the alley. As discussed last time, this is the north facade. So if you were standing kind of looking across the grass or some of the trees, this is what the building would look like, but it will still be obstructed with some of the trees that will remain on site. So not a clear view of this, but this is how those additions wrap the existing building. The thing that I would note here before we go to the next slide, there is a revision to this northwest corner of the building based upon some of the comments about the appearance of that trash enclosure. So this actually is an enclosure. The roof line has been pulled over top of it, where previously it was left as kind of an addendum or attached structure to the overall building. And then you'll see basically this green area is more of a venting for that enclosure function. This is the west elevation that I would say has seen the most change of any. Previously, there was an enter into kind of an alcove that would have gotten you into the kitchen or the dining and fire sprinkler room. And then the trash enclosure, as then attached, had previously been shown here. It's still shown in this location, but as you can see, it is more fitting with the remainder of that elevation. Not like the attached structure, but they actually have doors. We're not certain. I don't know that the applicant has decided if it's more of a roll-up door or kind of an open set of doors, but it would be very fitting with the rest of the architecture along that facade. I did include this image in your staff report, just comparing the previous to the new. So you can see an extension of that storefront glazing that's being brought across that pane. Really does enhance kind of the overall aesthetic of that function and doesn't really highlight much of just the enclosure function at all. If anything, most people might think of that as just being a secondary door into the building.
One question, are those access doors as well on the I'm not sure which elevation I'm looking
West
at.
side.
The west side here, are those all access doors too, or where's the main entrance? It's on the, I would assume it's on the south
The
side.
main entrance would be, if you can see my hand, the main entrance would be on the face over here. This is where Tower Boulevard is located. What you see here with some arrows on these are actually more of a French type door or sliding door that would go out to the patio that's on that side of the building.
Okay.
So that patio, if we reverted back to the site plan, that patio stretches along kind of these three bays
Okay.
of doors and windows.
But it's one restaurant that we're talking about on this level, right?
Correct.
It's not multiple businesses.
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
And other than that, I'm happy to go through some of the conditions. I would just highlight that the two conditions that I added to that resolution or recommendation relate to the installation of the accessible parking and the loading functions for food delivery to take place off-street in the location identified here tonight. As noted before, applicant is here to answer any questions you have, and I do know we have a member of the public that would probably like to speak or may have questions at the public hearing.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Any initial comments or discussion?
I think this is a great compromise. I think, the extension of the roof line there, I mean, it aesthetically, that looks great. The handicap parking is great. I think the compromise to cart the food over there is gonna really help matters for, blocking traffic there. So I really appreciate you doing this. Thank you.
Yeah, I would echo those comments. I think the applicant took the comments to heart and seriously and brought back a proposal that I feel reflects the comments that were made. I think part of our comments during the last meeting too were questioning, is it engineeringly feasible to access it on the alley side? And it sounds like from the analysis that was done that it's not. And I guess I had a question, did our engineer Kara have a chance to review that as well? And does she concur with that?
So a lot of it has to do with just the function of getting the truck back in, that because of the slope, you need a greater area of unobstructed space to back into some kind of a loading function. So from that standpoint, yes.
I mean, if the city in their review from a technical perspective is in agreement, then, I'm comfortable with this alternative. I think that the results that are presented here are reflective of our comments and I think can function, well.
I think some of the aspects that I appreciate about the adjustments is kind of following your line of thought. If that's true, that it's not feasible to access the back of house functions from the alley side of the building, I think then what's being proposed here is a significant improvement from previously, because I think when we were talking about it in the context of the long view of things and recognizing that this is an attractive street front in the downtown, the future development of the site is a unique site. It's a corner site. Something may get developed there in the future, and so I think by adjusting the approach, enclosing the trash, making it feel less like trash is not likely to detract from the street front as much as it may have previously in an open air traditional trash holding area. And to be honest, I think it will enhance the proposed outdoor seating patio area that's being proposed by the applicant nearby. I think overall that will be more complementary with the current proposal compared to the previous. And I think the clarity around the function of that access is helpful to understand. It's trash, but not full-on deliveries on a regular basis, and that there's a strategy for delivery nearby. Seems like that was a good exercise to get clarity around that.
I agree with all the comments too, and I think this is a wonderful overall idea. I mean, I just think it'll enhance the downtown that much more, and the proposed changes it just looks wonderful, I think. Just to get my name in the books, I suppose.
Yeah, I really won't have anything to add either. I think everything has been covered by what everybody else here has said. So,
So it's also nice that we can maintain, and I appreciate the fact that we're maintaining the historical character of the Creamery building. So I know that was probably in the forefront of this design, and it really comes through. And I think having that as part of our heritage and celebrating it in a redevelopment like this really makes a lot of sense.
I'll add that I appreciate the analysis done around the parking. I think there was some discussion at the last meeting around, what the spirit of the code in terms of providing equitable access to all customers. And, there was a little bit of debate about last time about, whether it was, across the road or down the way may not meet the spirit of the intent of that. And I think where you ended is a great result in terms of that does seem like the most natural path in terms of where the public would expect to enter this type of facility, even though the entrance is a little bit down the way. I think the fact that it didn't work out over in the corner, it actually probably worked out even better that with what's proposed in terms of the easy access to that sidewalk, and it works from the corner in terms of the grades, and it seems natural. So I appreciate that work that was done.
What are the plans of the existing stack? Is that going to be utilized? It looks the chimney. There's some deterioration, and I've loved this building. This building is just cool. It's one of the few historic buildings we still have in town that I really admire. I love history. We have.
Hi, I'm Mary Mavison. Thank you very much for the question. The chimney has been struck by lightning. It has gone straight through. We are analyzing if we can rebuild it or if it has to be taken down. But the lightning strike has gone all the way. It's on both sides. So if we can do something, we're going to. We like it too. But if it became prohibitive, then we wouldn't do it. Just take it down.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions of me?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Thank you for your feedback last time. I think we have a better project this time.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'll just remind our group that another part of this review, even though I think there was broad consensus at the last meeting, has to do with the building materials. And I still feel the same as I expressed last time, that I thought that a lot of care had been given in terms of the quality of the materials and understanding of our central business district requirements.
Is there, just point of clarification, is there a question in there, or are you reminding us that we should be paying attention to something that we haven't commented on yet, or just trying to get?
No, to be honest, I only said that just recognizing that it's a continuation of the previous meeting, and in case anybody who wasn't here last time had any questions about that.
Thank you.
I appreciate the clarity. I'm thinking.
Sorry. Sometimes as a facilitator, I try to lob up a softball for a discussion.
Good.
It was a poor pitch on my part. So
I did miss the last meeting. I love what I see, and I follow you guys' lead on it. It looks great. I love the fact we're going to preserve this awesome building and not tear it down and put something different in.
sounds good. Well, I think I'm going to go ahead and open the public hearing since that is a part of our process. So I'll open the public hearing. If anybody in the audience wants to share some thoughts or questions, you're welcome to do so. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Thank you. All right, any additional questions or comments before we move forward?
Do we have a suitor for the building? Is that appropriate to ask?
What's that?
Do we have a suitor for the building?
I know that the applicant's working with a restaurateur, but I don't know if you're ready to name who that person is yet.
Okay, thank you.
One question that still is in the back of my mind, not related to this specific building, but the site itself can accommodate additional development, correct, Ben?
Correct. So as outlined in the staff report, particularly that north area, let me go back to. So this today, what looks like open space is still part of this the ownership's property, and I know that they've contemplated what else could be done with that piece. I don't know that they're ready today to say exactly what that looks like. Previously, and we talked a little bit about this in terms of history of what this project has seen in terms of proposals. Before Enki had ever gone into the space, this same ownership group had made a proposal, I think in 2008. Does that sound right? That included removing the existing creamery building and replacing it with basically 2 structures on site. So I think today the ownership group is still looking at what other opportunity is there to use that northern space, but I don't know that they've solidified exactly what that is.
So I guess, excuse me, the question in my mind then, does this become subdivided? And does that northern lot become a separate lot that is treated as a lot? Or is it still part of the same lot that we have to take into consideration just the building as opposed to all the other?
It kind of depends on what that final use is. I mean, it's fairly typical if you look at retail destinations that are all commercial enterprises that one owner might own several buildings on one parcel. If for some reason they wanted to split that up or they weren't going to retain ownership, you could certainly see a subdivision in the future.
Okay.
A lot of those decisions will be made based on that end use, their separation requirements from buildings, so a lot of that will go into how they evaluate what that final use is on the north side.
Okay.
Perhaps a minor detail, Ben, but when I'm looking at the resolution,
Yeah.
about third paragraph on the bottom, the date of the public hearing, I'm wondering if that wants to be revised to
Yep.
today's date.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, certainly if there aren't any other changes to the resolution, I'd just ask that the motion clarify amending the resolution to reflect the appropriate dates of today.
Okay. Well, I think we made great progress. I'm prepared to make a recommendation unless there's any other comments. All right, I'll go ahead and I'll go ahead and move that we approve resolution number 17-16, which is a resolution recommending approval of a site plan and building materials and conditional use permit for use of public parking related to the proposed redevelopment of the property known as the Creamery Building, located at 7929 Victoria Drive, Victoria, Minnesota, as submitted by Victoria Creamery LLC, with the conditions as noted, including the clarification regarding today's date for the public hearing. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Sounds good. I assume, Ben, this will go forward to the next city council meeting.
Correct, Monday, October 9th.
Great. Appreciate your thoughts. Yep.
Thank you.
All right, moving on. Council meeting update.
Really?
Anybody attend?
No. Ben.
Yeah, let me just scroll through. So the final plat for Hill Point was on and approved at the last council meeting on September 25th.
Thank you.
I would say that was probably one of the big items that would resonate with this group. The other big things, I know we could probably tackle this under miscellaneous, but just a reminder that we do have the joint workshop with the City Council and Parks and Recreation Committee scheduled for Monday, October 16th. Date we'll be talking about the comprehensive plan with all 3 groups collectively. Otherwise, unless you have questions about what's going on at the council level, I don't have anything else in terms of what the previous September 20th.
And can you share some thoughts on what you feel like the nature of or the format of that joint meeting might be, and if there's any, like what the expectations are or any preparation that might be anticipated beforehand?
Yes, thank you. I probably jumped in a little early to tackling that under council updates, but perfect time to talk about it.
Sure.
So with all three groups, we're going to try to stay relatively high level with everyone in terms of what types of goals or strategies as a community should we be looking at. So we will talk about kind of our growth areas where the community is growing into from today's city limits through 2040. But again, looking at it through the lens of, as we talk about parks, as we talk about land use, some of those other big ticket items that relate to how growth impacts the city we live in, we're going to try to stay at kind of that 10,000 foot view with everyone as what should we be trying to accomplish through these different alternatives that are being presented. Not really going on a parcel by parcel basis to say, no, this should be changed to townhome or this should be commercial, or we're not necessarily looking for the group as a whole to start dictating what those options should be, but really let's collectively work through what are the objectives we're trying to accomplish, and is there some semblance through the couple alternatives that are presented that accomplishes bits and pieces of those, so we can kind of repackage it into one plan after we get the public to give their comments through an open house format and some online participation opportunities.
So this is responding similar to what the recent steering committee subject matter was? Okay, so it's primarily
Yes.
focused on the south growth areas and the west growth areas.
Other than with these three entities, instead of looking at, so the steering committee was looking at things a little bit further down. So if we want this collective group of three entities on the 16th to look at that 10,000, we were probably at a 5,000 because we were looking a little bit more specific on, if we look at our south area, south of Marsh Lake Road down to County Road 10, the steering committee was looking at things like, why is open space shown in the ways it was? And we got into the details about, well, there's existing hydrology, there's drainage corridors, there's wetlands, there are things that informed the planning process as to why. We'll talk about those things when the group of three committees gets together, but we're really looking at how should we embrace or use open space as a land use practice. Should it be an extension of our park system? Should it be to capture more than just a natural resource at any one time? So it'll be more of big picture level thinking of how should we be building this community moving forward. There was some talk at the steering committee meeting this last time about just kind of that vision and guiding principles. I think more of the conversation with these three groups is going to be really getting into the weeds of what is the vision for the community and what are those guiding principles that will inform that final land use plan. What I would say to the question of, are there things that you can do to prepare for it? If you haven't gotten on this page before or in a recent period of time, everything from the last steering committee meeting in terms of documents and information that we'll also be talking about at different levels on the 16th is on this page under meeting 5. There's a lot of information to dissect here. I would say if you were going to start anywhere, start with the overall land use plan and just flip through the meeting presentation. If there are things that don't necessarily make sense to you that you want answers to before you come on the 16th, just give me a call or shoot me an email or something. The more that you can look at them and just try to understand what land use is represented as what color, and even this land use typology exhibit. It'll take a minute to load. We'll talk about these different land use classifications. Getting familiar with these descriptions, I think, would be a good thing to just at least have gone through before you come to the meeting. So when we say medium density, you're already ready to know what that means for this planning effort. Same thing for some of these commercial nodes that we really haven't done a lot of done no commercial development outside of downtown. So as we move into some of these growth areas and we're planning for additional non-residential uses, getting familiar with how these are describing them and making sure you either agree or don't agree that this is representative of what should happen in those places, that's where I would start.
For what it's worth, I'll just share, having prepared for that meeting and then sat in on that meeting, what I found if you wanted to short circuit your way to like getting your head right to prepare for this kind of workshop is open up there's a south area and there's two options, and there's the west area and there's two options. And so open up each of them and just flip between the two options. Because graphically you'll see, well, here's one way to develop the city, and then the second, here's a different way of thinking about it, and just how it orients, density towards different types of roadways. It just gets you start thinking about, how you feel differently about that. I found that to be like the best way to prepare for it, because when I initially started and trying to like really like explore and understand a single option, it was a little bit less engaging until I started flipping between the two and finding the nuance between them. It's like, oh yeah, that's like a totally different way to think about it, and then like, how do I feel about that?
Right.
For what that's worth, it'll accelerate your preparation as you.
And again, I wouldn't get caught up so much in trying to go by like square block area, or is
Right.
this one section here supposed to be townhome or single family? Don't get yourself to that level, because all of it will likely change when we come back and get feedback from the public. There's going to be those types of comments that I'm sure they'll bring out for us. So I'd more worry about, okay, should these types of land uses, do they make sense given this is County Road 11, the north-south, very prominent roadway? Does it make sense that we want to push some of those more intense uses towards that corridor, or do we more blend them into the overall landscape? Those types of questions are probably what I would be evaluating also to get yourself ready for the type of discussion we'll have. And same thing as Jeff had outlined, there's sections in here for parks and trails for those two. So there's land use options for the south and west area. There's parks, trails, and open space options for those areas as well. So just opening them up and really start to, just study the legend enough so that you can identify what's trying to be illustrated on them, and then you'll see differences. So there's completely different strategies, particularly with parks, between options both in the south and the west area, that are just interesting to kind of think about.
Yeah, and starts with the roads, and then the land use. I mean, if you're looking at it, that because the road strategy dictates then the land use strategy then dictates the circulation and interconnected pathways.
Correct.
That's really fun. It's been a fun exercise. It's been fun to be part of. Question on the County Road 10, the Marsh Lake Road. We had looked at the two. Can we talk about this here?
Yeah.
I just didn't want to get in trouble.
Sure.
Still learning. Remember in the west development, the Marsh Lake?
Yep.
Went from this nice fluid corridor that would handle a lot of traffic. And option A, option B had, let's create a funnel and neck it down to a single lane and open it back up to a 4-lane. Was that even considerable?
Yeah, so I think it's slightly illustrated incorrect, but let me, just for the whole group that wasn't there. So at some point in time, Marsh Lake Road is intended to extend from the intersection of 43 over to Airport Road so that we connect into Waconia. Long term, there is a future corridor that goes through what's today farmland to connect the two communities other than Highway 5 and County Road 10. This one option shows the alignment that I would say the county has drafted. They haven't formalized it, but they've generally said it makes the most sense from the intersection at 43 that exists here to extend further to the west, kind of in the fashion that you're seeing it on this. The second is a more recent development, and I would just highlight, I think that it's illustrated incorrectly, but the intent is there. Okay. So similar to how you would think about Pioneer Drive in Chaska, where you come from Target, you go through one roundabout, you go north for about a quarter mile, and then you go through another roundabout before you jog over past the town course. The concept here is put a roundabout at the existing intersection with 43, and then maybe the Tellers Road segment, that there's a roundabout at Tellers and 43 that becomes the extension of Marsh Lake Road heading towards airport. So it's not intended to neck down into a single, like a 2-lane roadway section the way it is today. I think it was more just showing it as a break.
Got it. Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Yep.
Is that one thing that just caught my mind?
But those are great things to at least try to look at. As the chairman had pointed out, just look at the differences between what the options show, because you'll start to see that those little nuances are worked in. You'll also see in some cases we have a more continuous open space framework in one of the options, and then the other one, it appears to be broken because we've introduced a conservation residential land use designation. So there's those little things that you'll see in one versus the other, and we're trying to just vet out, is there a correct approach? They might not be shown exactly where everyone wants them to be, but is that idea of having another kind of preservation or conservation land use in our toolbox a good thing? Makes sense? Lots of head nods.
It's a good summary.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ben.
And that's the primary, so that'll be a facilitated discussion by either you or our
It'll
consultant?
be our consultant. I'll probably open it up just to kind of set the stage on what our objective as a group is. I think as it always is when you get into these, there are some people that really latch on to certain areas or certain properties, and it's hard not, when you see something that looks done or complete or more detailed, to not really get into the weeds. We're still going to try to stay at that 10,000 foot level with the group. So come prepared to like pinch yourself or reframe mentally so that you aren't the one spewing out like, I really just don't understand this intersection. Well, that intersection might not exist the way that it's shown. So just come in thinking we are going to try to stay at that high level, really get into what are those critical principles that will inform what that final plan should be. I think it'll be a really fascinating conversation.
That's great.
That's all I have.
Well, I'm excited to see the results, because I think that, getting the approach or the philosophy sort of clearly understood is what that type of committee or group needs then to sort of go forward in alignment with that,
Correct.
right? Because you can't set a plan without a philosophy or a general guiding approach, so it should be good. All right, moving on. Anything under miscellaneous tonight? Anyone?
The only other things that I'd point out again on that comp plan topic, so there are some other critical dates coming up yet this month and into November that I just want to make sure at least on your radar, and I can send out invites if you want to have it that way so you can choose to participate or not.
Please do.
October 25th will be a public open house on the concepts that have been created. So kind of that first time that we're actually bringing people into City Hall, likely, and it will be an open house format, so we'll probably have several boards and hopefully multiple people facilitating with the public what these different options are, and at least what options there are for comment through that process. After going through the conversation with the planning or the city council, and the Parks and Rec committee, if any of you wanted to come to the open house just to stay informed on kind of where some of those public comments are, certainly welcome you to do that. That will be the 25th. I'll get times put together. We're still wrestling with, should that be a little bit earlier? Should it be a little bit later? Or maybe just leave the window open longer for what that open house format looks like. But we'll start really promoting that late this week and early next week to get a good turnout then. Our steering committee will then have its next meeting November 15th. So they'll basically be digesting all of the comments received from the public. We're also meeting with neighborhood or property ownership groups in that south and the west area to get their feedback. This morning I met with Lake Association board representatives. We're also meeting with the Downtown Business Association Thursday morning this week. So trying to get some more smaller group facilitation to help just garner some of those comments and feedback. So I would see moving forward, we'll probably have more actual conversations about the comprehensive plan after we get past that November 15th meeting. So definitely into the second meeting in November for this group, and then into December, much more just updates probably, and walking through where we are with public comment and what might be changing through the planning process. I would note on the 16th, if you're interested, so that the 16th joint workshop with the three groups starts at 7. There will be a 6 o'clock Park and Recreation Committee meeting. If you wanted to come early and sit in on that, one of the topics will be the Wasserman Park project. I don't have any materials to even walk you through tonight, but by the 16th, there will be more information created to identify kind of where we're headed with that project. So if you're interested in that, I'd certainly recommend sitting in and seeing what that discussion looks like.
Good. I'm betting you've already thought about this, but I'm just curious, so I'll ask. If you thought about how you will gather feedback in a open house type setting?
Usually
with people kind of coming through at various stations.
Usually it has to do with either physical writing opportunities. So normally would create boards like what you may have seen at the steering committee meetings, but you just have basically a blank notes section on the side that will take. Other ways that we'll do it, depending on what seems to make the most sense and how people are engaging, is you'll also maybe look at stickers that are color coded that says I like or I dislike this, and it may be similar to what we do with Social Pinpoint in terms of we've got colors that represent different options of how you provide feedback. Mm-hmm. So it'll kind of be a few different ways that we'll be engaging.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, you could almost give them colored dots. They could write a number on the dot, and then over on the sheet paper, number 36, this is why I like it or why I don't like it. Or
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I have technology issues over here. I went to block out a time frame for that November meeting.
Yeah.
And just copied a previous meeting and invited everybody from the committee to that meeting, and I'm trying to shut it off, and I'm failing miserably. So the council chambers and everybody in the steering committee is getting invited as we speak, and I can't turn it off. So when you get a bunch of dumb calls, that's my fault.
Okay.
You'll be getting one too, Jeff.
oh, I got it. I saw it come through. I thought, what are you doing down there? Oops.
Yeah, that's okay.
Well, aside from John's drama down there, is there any other miscellaneous?
Nothing here.
I don't know that we have a ton of new development proposals that will be coming in. There were some things that looked like they were picking up steam, but I think for where we are in the year, that'll taper off a little bit. Maybe as we get into November, December, as people, I hate to say it already, but start gearing up for spring, might see some concepts roll through. So we'll probably start devoting a lot of our time to either continued ordinance revisions or some of the comprehensive plan discussion.
John, had you mentioned at one time that there was possibly going to be a proposal for that lot that's behind Floyd's, I guess to the west of
It
Floyd?
was supposed to be. They had some disagreements on the condition of the soil.
Oh.
It's caught up in litigation, and now it's moved from that, along with the conditions of the soil, into, with the most recent events, the reconstruction of the southern part of the U.S. with all the hurricanes, material costs have gone through the roof, and their bid basically went up 30 or 40% of construction. So it's kind of tied up in that mess right now. Our materials are heading south.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So still at some point, might see a proposal, but it probably is next year.
Yeah. The proposal I brought forth was supposed to come back the following month, and then things got hung up, and
Sure.
they're still hung up.
If nothing else, I'll move that we adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Have a good evening.
Oh, I'm an idiot.
Thank you.
That's the worst thing to do tonight.
You couldn't wait until I stopped recording?
That's now on
you heard that already.
5
part of the
seconds.
public record now, John. You can't deny it.
We'll just make it a sound bite.
We're done.